one last thing here before we get to our guests. 10 cent. If there's a ray of hope in this market, sure, there's a lot of green, but I would argue this one might be the most important. If you're a believer of the idea that the growth sell-off began in China and Chinese tech and Chinese growth, 10 cent moving sideways. And also, I might add, Wynn Resorts finally, after just getting absolutely decimated throughout all of 2018. 10 cent peaked literally right on the day. Actually, it's right next to the day. I guess maybe not literally, but right in the S&P 500 high. It never came back. It was like just the air was let out of the entire Chinese growth trade. Maybe it's got something to do with China as well. But remember, this you thought was maybe a little leading sign saying, look, this problem was coming for our own tech and our own growth here. Well, suddenly 10 cent moving to the upside, not a bad little story. Same situation for Wynn Resorts. Perhaps the Chinese selling just needed a 50% sort of clearing of house for some of those stocks. Because that's about what they dropped, 47% for 10 cent. All right, let's get it going here. I got Alan Nuttman joining me this afternoon. He's Chief Market Strategist at Agora Financial. Okay, Alan, so a little bit of a bounce in stocks. It's been a pretty interesting week now that we're all awake post-holiday, Thanksgiving. What's going on, Alan?
It's a baby bounce. Let's call this a baby bounce. It's 1.5%. Last week was a slow grind lower. No bids stepped up. So we'll have to see how it responds this week. There's still some gaps up above in the S&P if you can look at this technically. And it was a straight down move. You talked about tech. Tech had gone down, had 9 consecutive sessions of lower highs and lower lows. So that was pretty significant. Let's see how it reacts on the bounce. I don't know if it's going to have a healthy recovery from here. But let's see when it bounces how the market reacts then.
I think it's a good point, Alan, right? Higher, just selling pressure that's basically been here, lower lows, lower highs for generally all of the FANG. I'm curious what you think of my 10 cent argument, the Chinese argument, Alan. We've talked about it before. Should we feel good that the fact that this other tech internet giant has paused at least in its selling?
Yes, you should. So that was something I was watching. Now, when I looked at it last, the options didn't trade in that particular stock, so I kind of put it off to the side. But I looked at that as a barometer as well, and it stopped going down. And at some point, obviously, it's going to offer some good value, considering what they really mean to that Chinese economy. So I think that's a healthy sign. If you look at FXI, the ETF that tracks China, the China Top 25, it has stabilized around this 40 level, and it keeps bouncing up to the 40. Once it gets up to 44, I think you could see some recovery. Now, you're going to ask me, what's going to cause that? Well, I don't know what's going to cause it, but we do have the G20 this week, and we've seen this over and over again, and silly me if I can't recognize a pattern, but we know that our politics likes to sabotage something and then say they've solved it. So let's see if they can do that this week with China and give us a nice, pleasant surprise.
All right, I know we're all waiting on some kind of tariff headline to help markets out. Alan, question though is that if we're in this sort of mode right now, especially with tech, we clearly see on days like today, there's an effort for this group to rally, but until it takes shape, are you convinced about any other broad sector or broad market implications, i.e., can you get S&P moving upwards until tech turns around?
Well, looking at the S&P, we're trading in a wide range for the last 6 weeks, between 2,800 and 2,600. Now, Friday, we did not take out last week's lows. That was a positive sign. And we're still above that October 29th low, if you can look at the broad S&P. I haven't liked the way we pressured that lows. We've talked many times before about I like to see one of those big sell-off days where you test and reject a low and then it reverses. That's what we've seen in the last 8 or 9 years. That really hasn't happened on heavy volume with one last swing just yet. I thought last week might be an attempt on that. It didn't happen. To get back to tech is still positive. If you look at the NDX 100, the top 100 tech stocks, it's still positive in 2018. Now, we've given back the gains, but is it better to have given back gains than never have had the gains in the first place? So sure, right. That's the question. I know it's painful. It's not enjoyable, but we've simply just given back gains in 2018.
Yeah. Alan, let's talk VIX for a sec. It has been almost static around 20. Totally different than what we got used to for the better part of the past 3 years. Not just the fact that it's not staying low anymore, but it doesn't mean revert in the same way. Is this notable to you?
It is notable. We are seeing a series of lower highs in the VIX. Let's go back to that October 29th spike low in the S&P. The VIX rallied to about 29. Now that was still significantly lower than it was back in February on that VIX explosion that we saw up to 50. But since that time, we've seen a series of lower highs, even though the market has gone lower. So I view that as very much a positive. Again, I'm not as convinced about, because I'd like to see more violent nature before a market reverses, and we haven't seen that. It's been a slow grind. And even at 20 is the halfway point of this move that we've seen from 11 to 29. So we're hovering right around this midpoint. Last week we closed above it. The 2 previous weeks below, we closed below that. So right now we're at the 18, 19 level. So I'm seeing the VIX continue to drift lower. Maybe the fear isn't as much as we feel it is.
Yeah. All right, Alan, looking forward to continuing the conversation. We got to leave it there for now. Always a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Nuckman is the Chief Market Strategist at Agora Financial. Let's continue that conversation about trade. I want to bring in